Week 2 is here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receiver tier list I give you guys every week in the season. Going through my wide receivers, tier by tier. Let's waste no more time. Let's go through the will they play tier. Again, with the will they play tier, the guys on the list for this week: Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants, Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers, Christian Kirk of the Houston Texans, and Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll start with Wan'Dale Robinson. He's dealing with an ankle injury at this current point, limited in practice, and he was deemed questionable going into the week. He will be probably out of my lineup regardless, unless you're in like a start 11, start 12, deep league PPR league. Even if Wan'Dale Robinson suits up, he will more than likely be on my bench. Tougher matchup, tough implied total for the Giants this week, and there's a very real possibility they might get mollywopped by the Cowboys in week 2. Next up is Jauan Jennings, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. He was limited in practice on Friday. However, the x-rays on his shoulder did come back negative, a shoulder injury he suffered, of course, in week 1. And he is something to monitor going into this weekend. If he does play, wide receiver 4 level expectation. Keep in mind, Brock Purdy going to be out of this contest with that toe injury he suffered in week 1. Next up is Christian Kirk, Houston Texans. He's not practicing again on Friday. Again, monitor what happens on Saturday. This is the Monday Night Football game. But I do lean on the side that he probably will not play, battling with that hamstring injury that kept him out of week 1. Again, unless you hear anything positive, like he practices in full on Saturday, which seems unlikely at this point, more than likely not going to be worth the risk to put in your lineup for Monday Night Football. And then finally, Chris Godwin. Again, the whole expectation coming into the year was probably a week 5 level return for Godwin. He did end up coming back to practice this week, but also didn't practice again on Friday. Limited capacity on Thursday, doesn't practice on Friday. Doesn't sound like he's going to come back in week 2, which again, I don't think will shock anybody given what we expected coming into the season. But let's go through the tier 1 wide receivers in my rankings. My top 5 guys, the cream of the crop when it comes to wide receiver this week. And standing at the throne, number 1 yet again, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. And I get it. If you had Ja'Marr Chase, he was a ghost in week 1. But let's not forget that he also started slow last year. In the first 3 games of last year, less than 10 PPR points per game. Weeks 4 on, we saw this guy be a 25 point per game scorer. Not to mention, great game environment. Number 1 in over-under this week at 48.5 of any game on the slate. And we're expecting this Bengals pass attack to get back to form. Burrow didn't look like himself. Higgins didn't look like himself. Ja'Marr Chase, of course, didn't look like himself. And I think the Jaguars represent a big opportunity to right the ship. Bounce back game environment. I'm expecting the Bengals to score a ton of points. Ja'Marr Chase, wide receiver 1 overall. Wouldn't be shocked if he scored a 40 bomb. Coming in at number 2, and a wide receiver that probably could have had a much bigger box score in week 1, is CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys going up against the aforementioned New York Giants. 13 targets, 18 PPR points. Like, you can't be mad at what he was able to provide you in that tough matchup going up against that Eagles secondary in week 1. But that's just without the context. Again, there was a lot of meat left on the bone. You guys see this graphic, for example. This was tweeted by Underdog. And keep in mind, this is in half PPR. So in full PPR, CeeDee Lamb gave you an 18-point week. In half PPR, he scored 15.5 points. But given the opportunity that he had, could have potentially scored 29.1. The drops really inhibited him, really ruined the ceiling potential week that CeeDee Lamb had in week 1. And it sounds like he's been taking it serious. He's been talking about the drops, how he's got to be better as a player all week. And the Giants, if you do recall, Drew Phillips last year was the one that hurt CeeDee Lamb's shoulder. So I'm expecting a revenge game. I'm expecting CeeDee Lamb to play his best football. And if that's the case, we know what Dak Prescott does to the Giants every year. At number 3, we have Puka Nacua, wide receiver of the LA Rams. And despite a game where the Rams only scored 14 points, obviously a good Texans defense on the other side, Puka Nacua produced 23 PPR points, 11 targets, and a 41% target share for Matthew Stafford in this game. In week 1, he operated as the clear target hog for the Rams, and with Devontae Adams added to the fold to replace Cooper Kupp, we actually saw Nacua used inside. Last year, didn't play as many snaps as you would have expected inside, only 29% of the snaps in the slot. In week 1, he was up to 65.2% of the snaps in the slot. Devontae Adams, he's a great X wide receiver. If you're Sean McVay now, you now have the affordability to move Puka Nacua inside out, and this makes his fantasy ceiling gigantic. We could be talking about 2021 Cooper Kupp, assuming that this Rams passing volume remains. And now going up against this Titans secondary, a much easier defense than he played last week against the Texans, I'm expecting Puka Nacua to continue the fireworks. A wide receiver 4, we have Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings going to play the Atlanta Falcons at home this week, and he experienced the highs and lows of a first-year starting quarterback. J.J. McCarthy, first game in the NFL, inconsistent passing attack as a whole for the Vikings. Despite only having 44 yards, though, we saw that JJ scored a touchdown and Justin Jefferson had a 39% target share from McCarthy. Minnesota this week implied for 24 points against Atlanta in a game that projects to be the third fastest of the slate. Expecting more than the 20 pass attempts we saw from the Vikings offense in week 1, given what the Falcons were able to do to the Bucs ground game. Hence, Justin Jefferson, top 4 wide receiver in my rankings. And on the flip side of the matchup, coming in at number 5 and the final name in my elite tier at wide receiver this week, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. And my oh my, the volume that he commanded in week 1 was special. Sure, not the craziest box score performance, about 15.5 PPR points, but he got 15 targets and he was number 2 on the week in expected fantasy points. I'm expecting Drake London to take full flight. This level of involvement, again, 13 plus targets per game since Penix has taken over, this is rare. This is 2019 Michael Thomas-esque. I can fully see, given the context of this Falcons offense, Penix wants to stay in the pocket, rip darts from it. I can see Drake London having that 2019 Michael Thomas year, and not to mention in this game in week 2, fast-paced game environment, like I said, and if London is able to break some big plays in addition to this volume, we are talking about a wide receiver 1 overall ceiling. But moving on to my tier 2 wide receivers, and I'm just going to call this the wide receiver 1s, wide receivers 6 through 11 in my rankings this week. At number 6, bad week last week, I know, but Nico Collins, I'm going back to the well, wide receiver of the Houston Texans. And this game environment, 42.5 over-under. Texans are 2.5 point favorites in this game against Tampa Bay. And I get it. Like, if you started Nico Collins, you were not thrilled with what he was able to do in your lineup in week 1. However, we saw the Buccaneers make the Falcons a pass-happy team in week 1 with how they limited the ground game. If you think that the Texans have any hope of running the football against this Bucs front, you are mistaken. With Nico Collins, like Drake London, he is the clear alpha level wide receiver 1 in this offense, especially if Christian Kirk's not available in this game. I'm expecting the ship to get right for Nico this week. At number 7, we have Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Brian Thomas Jr., Trevor Lawrence, they couldn't get on the same page in week 1. Only connected, 1 of their 7 targets. BTJ ends up scoring his touchdown through the ground game. But this is still the same Brian Thomas Jr. that averaged 23 PPR points per game after the team's bye week last year. And while Travis Hunter actually led the team in targets last week, as we'll get into later, we can still expect an extremely consolidated target hierarchy for the Jags. 15 of the Trevor Lawrence 31 pass attempts went to either Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter in this game. And even though I love Travis Hunter, I think he has an uncapped ceiling at wide receiver. I still think Brian Thomas Jr. is the number 1 wide receiver here, especially in the early season. But this will be something to monitor moving forward. However, like I said, even if Travis Hunter ends up getting a slight margin more of targets, this is still an extremely concentrated situation and a clear bounce back spot going up against the Cincinnati defense. At number 8, we got Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants, and he commanded a 32.4% target share in that first game with Russell Wilson. But the Commanders held the Giants to 6 points scored, and Andrew Thomas is doubtful for the game in week 2 against the Cowboys. And this could be good news for the potential raw volume of Malik Neighbors. Good game script for the Giants. Cowboys probably going to get up on them early. We could see a ton of volume for Malik Neighbors in general. The question that I have, though, is I'm a bit worried that the Giants just simply don't have the touchdown equity to support a Malik Neighbors, top 1, top 3 overall ceiling week. And look, I get it with the Giants. We never drafted Malik Neighbors to have, a 25-point, a 28-point implied team total in any week. However, like I said, there's a real chance without Andrew Thomas in this game that Russell Wilson and this offense simply get overwhelmed. Coming in at wide receiver 9, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, and he got absolutely shut down by the Packers in week 1. But after what we've seen from the Packers, that game against the Lions, Thursday Night Football against the Commanders, is the Packers defense the best in the league? Like, genuinely speaking, what they have put on display in these first 2 weeks of the season, the way Micah Parsons get after the quarterback, that Packers defense is absolutely no joke. So I'm willing to write off that week 1 performance by the Lions simply due to the fact that I think the Packers defense might be special. However, any way we slice it, I think the main worry for Amon-Ra St. Brown is the volume. Only 6 targets commanded on 39 Jared Goff passes. He only commanded 6 targets on 39 Jared Goff passes. And in fact, both Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta actually out-targeted him in this game. Don't get me wrong. I still think Amon-Ra St. Brown is the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. But there's far more target competition than there's been in the past for Amon-Ra St. Brown. However, this is a great game environment. Fourth highest over-under of the slate. High implied total for the Lions at 26.25. He's almost the polar opposite bet of Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, we're betting on him because of the volume, even despite the offensive concerns. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, we're betting on the offensive situation, even if he sees a slight downtick in volume. Coming at wide receiver 10, we have Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers. And the Chargers, they were number 1 in the NFL in pass rate over expectation in week 1. While that won't continue, it's a far cry from the run-heavy Roman belief that we had coming into the season. With the LA Chargers, they have 3 quality wide receivers, but it's still clear Ladd McConkey, he is the alpha of this group. Don't get me wrong, solid game in week 1, but entering year 2, he has the opportunity to be the clear number 1 wide receiver for an elite quarterback and an offense that is willing to air it out. Combine that with a game against the Raiders where the Chargers are implied for 25 points this week. That is why I'm all in on Ladd McConkey, top 10 wide receiver, and we could be talking about a mid-range wide receiver 1 given the upside. Wide receiver 11 is Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks, and what a week 1 for JSN. He led the NFL in target rate, target share, and air yard share in week 1. And he is this team's clear alpha number 1 wide receiver. Cooper Kupp, he's washed. Torrey Horton, he's not quite ready to make a big dent in this team's air attack. It is going to be the JSN show for the foreseeable future. And with Clint Kubiak, I'll give him credit, man. He was creative. We saw JSN, used in motion, used in space. He was the true engine of the Seahawks offense, and that was against a very good 49ers defense. So the 18.5 implied Seahawks points this week should not scare you going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if he keeps this level of target dominance up, he will continue to rise up my rankings. We could be talking about this year's Amon-Ra St. Brown. But moving on to the next tier, and this is the high-end wide receiver 2s. The wide receivers 12 through 16 in my rankings this week. Starting at wide receiver 12, we have T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And like Jamar Chase, he was a victim of the fact that Joe Burrow only had 113 passing yards in that game. That won't happen again for the Cincinnati Bengals. And for T. Higgins himself, more than Chase, he's a lot more volatile to the game environment. We saw the ebbs and flows of T. Higgins last year. In a season, he was the wide receiver 5 in points per game. And he still has the type of weekly ceiling that can downright win you a week. Ask the people that started him in week 17 last season. Coming in at 13, we have A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. And there are concerns for A.J. Brown that worry me enough to downgrade him, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of doubt for week 1. The Chiefs game environment, still the 3rd highest game over-under of the slate, with the Eagles implied for 24 points in this game. And the Chiefs are one of the few defenses in the league that can actually limit Saquon Barkley on the ground. In the Super Bowl, we saw negative 45 rush yards over expected for Barkley in that game. Hopefully we can get one of the big bounce backs for one of the elite wide receivers in football. At 14 is where Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets hears his name called. And Garrett Wilson, he shut me up in week 1. Despite a terrible matchup and a somehow worse game environment, we saw 22.5 PPR points for a Jets offense that showed big-time signs of life. With Garrett Wilson, he is still the volume alpha of this offense, but if Fields continues to play well, that's huge for Garrett Wilson's fantasy value. In this game environment, 4th highest over-under the slate, with the 5th highest projected pace going up against Buffalo. Garrett Wilson in your lineup with mid to high-end wide receiver 2 expectations. At 15, we got Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver of the Arizona Cardinals. 5 catches, 71 yards, receiving touchdown in week 1, despite only 29 pass attempts and 163 passing yards from Kyler Murray. McBride, he is still the number 1 target on this team, but week 1 was an encouraging sign for Marv's progression as a player. And in this matchup, we got 25 implied points this week for the Cardinals, but a potential shadow matchup going up against J.C. Horn. This is a big test for Marvin Harrison Jr. And how he handles this test against J.C. Horn could determine the type of fantasy wide receiver we'll be getting for the rest of the season. Now, wide receiver 16, we have Tetairoa McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. T-Mac, he opened up as the alpha in week 1, and he's already a 27% target share in that game. The volume upside, absolutely there. Xavier Legette, he looked overwhelmed in this game, and Hunter Renfrow is their current starting slot wide receiver. Tetairoa McMillan, he was a top 10 level pick, wide receiver 1 expectations, and it looks like he's already arrived there in the NFL. Look, I get it, Bryce Young, he had a bad day, but I still believe in Bryce Young given how he finished last season, and the Cardinals, they could very well be the bounce back spot we need for McMillan. Will Johnson, he had a great game in week 1, but we could see T-Mac's volume get him over the top. Moving on to the next tier, at wide receiver 17, we have Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and while he still led the team in targets in week 1, He was outproduced both in terms of yards and receiving touchdowns to Emeka Egbuka, and now he gets the toughest matchup on the field going up against Derek Stingley. And I had Evans extremely high in my rankings last week. Look, I still want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I can see Egbuka straight up flipping him if weeks like week 1 continue. The way Egbuka looked, the way that the Bucs offensive line is performing without Tristan Wirfs, if Emeka Egbuka continues to be that intermediate, Chris Godwin level target in the layer of this offense, we could see significantly more volume going his way. However, with Big Mike, he scored 10 plus touchdowns in 4 of the last 5 years. Even if the volume goes down, this Bucs offense is good, and he's always a big time threat to score. At 18, we got Travis Hunter, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he just led the Jacksonville Jaguars with a 29% target share, and he could have had potentially an 84-yard touchdown on top. If you guys do recall in that game, he was wide open, down the field, DB makes a great play, picks off Trevor Lawrence. If that ball gets layered even a little bit more, we're talking about an 84-yard house call for Travis Hunter. You'll look at the 6 for 33 line, 6 catches, 33 yards, Wan'Dale Robinson level line. It's uninspiring, I get it. However, the way you should be looking at it is that it's a positive that Liam Cohn is already designing him so many touches in space. Look, guys, the big plays, they will come, and this could be the exact game environment we need going up against the Bengals this week. I wouldn't be shocked if after this week, we are talking about Travis Hunter as a weekly top 12 wide receiver. At number 19, we got Davante Adams of the LA Rams, and it was the Puka Nacua show in week 1, but that was because Davante Adams drew the difficult matchup on the field going up against Derek Stingley, and he still earned 8 targets on 29 Stafford passes for a 27.6% target share. The Titans defense, they played extremely well against the Broncos last week, but an experienced quarterback like Matthew Stafford and an experienced pass attack like the LA Rams could pose a different problem for the secondary. Their number 1 cornerback, L'Jarius Sneed, is coming off offseason surgery, and the rest of the cornerback core is uninspiring. And with Davante Adams, he looked good, he commanded volume, and now has a far easier matchup than having to get shadowed by one of the 3 best corners on earth. At number 20, we got Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears, and I'm still baffled that there are people out there ranking DJ Moore above Rome Odunze, preferring DJ Moore to Rome Odunze, when all the tea leaves this offseason have pointed to the fact that Rome Odunze is going to be taking the wide receiver 1 role, and the week 1 evidence that we got of it. My oh my, Rome Odunze, alpha level wide receiver 1. 93% of the routes, 25% of the targets, and when we look at the air yards as well, 24%, 100% of the end zone targets, and 40% of the targets on money downs. 3rd and 4th down, game on the line, drive on the line. We got Rome Odunze at a 40% target share in those situations. And now he gets the Lions in a game that has the 4th highest over-under of the slate. Listen, I'm pleading with you. Buy Rome Odunze now before he has the eventual blow-up week, and with Ben Johnson wanting blood against his old team, that could very well be this week, my wide receiver 20. At 21, we got Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I kind of alluded to it when I was talking about Mike Evans, but there's a very real possibility sooner rather than later, he can straight up flip Evans given the role he operates in this offense. Until Chris Godwin gets back, we can expect 40+% of the slot snaps for Emeka Egbuka. And Emeka Egbuka, he's already got the goods. He looks good, and despite a tough matchup, he profiles as an every week wide receiver 2 until Chris Godwin returns to the lineup. Moving on to wide receiver 22, we have George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys, and I kind of talked about it when I went through CeeDee Lamb, but this is a huge boom spot for the Cowboys passing attack this week. George Pickens, I get it. Down week 1, 3 catches, 30 yards, but we do also have to contextualize. It was a 37-yard defensive pass interference. That, of course, doesn't count on the stat sheet. However, when you're profiling this game, going up against the Giants, 25 implied points for the Cowboys, home game, home opener. He's playing a defense that ran the 6th highest usage of cover 1 in week 1. George Pickens, if he sees cover 1, we are talking about big plays for a quarterback that's not afraid to chuck it down the field. And moving on to wide receiver 23, we have Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. He had a huge week 1. We're talking 50+% of the team targets, dominating the pass game production for the Ravens. Guys, Zay Flowers, he's always had an incredibly high weekly ceiling. I'll give him his flowers, no pun intended. It was a great week, but it's not like we haven't seen 25+ point performances from Zay Flowers in the past. When we look at this game going up against the Browns, you look at it from surface level, game environment, very nice. 7th highest over under, Ravens implied for such a high team total. But I will caution you the potential game script we could see in this game. Ravens 11.5 point favorites going up against a run funnel Browns defense that just held the Bengals pass attack to 113 yards like I mentioned with Chase and Higgins. So when I'm looking at this matchup, if he doesn't contribute early, there's a very real possibility the Ravens get up in this game. We see a lot of the big dog, and we could see the Ravens running roughshod in the ground attack when it comes to going up against the Browns. Not to mention, Denzel Ward, tough matchup for Zay Flowers. Again, I'll give him his benefit of the doubt. He's very clearly at this point a wide receiver 2, but I would throw caution in the wind in regards to his week 2 outlook. At wide receiver 24, we have Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos, and he had a very solid week 1. 25% target share, 18.1 PPR points. And this was despite Bo Nix struggling for the most part in this game. On one hand, he is the clear alpha for an offense we believe in with the Broncos that gets a Colts defense without their big signing at cornerback with Charvarius Ward not playing in this game. However, on the flip side, the Colts defense looked awesome against the Miami Dolphins, and Xavier Howard just had a great game. But moving on to the wide receiver 3s, and we'll try to go quicker moving forward. Terry McLaurin was my wide receiver 25. We saw on Thursday Night Football what he was able to do. 9 targets, 5 receptions, 48 receiving yards, and no receiving touchdowns. Grand total of 9.8 PPR points. And like I said, I mean, the Packers just might be the boogeyman when it comes to defensive matchups. The way that they have played defensively has been absolutely scary through 2 weeks. But there was one thing in this game that really stood out to me. When the Washington team got to the red zone, last year we saw a lot of red zone opportunity for Terry McLaurin. When the team got to the red zone this week, we saw Zach Ertz score a touchdown. We saw Deebo Samuel get a design look, score a touchdown at the end of the game. My question is, if Terry McLaurin can't score 13 touchdowns, how can he pay off at the level he did last year? People were probably taking him, 4th round, late 4th round of your drafts. And to be honest, I think at this point, him and Deebo have to be considered a 1A, 1B, and very close attached in the rankings. Not to mention, if Deebo keeps playing the way he has been and Terry keeps playing the way he has been, we could be talking about Deebo Samuel as the wide receiver 1 on this team moving forward. But moving on to wide receiver 26 for me, we have Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was one of the harder names to rank for me. Like on one side, you're looking at it, Dallas Goedert out for this game, A.J. Brown hobbled, Devontae Smith obviously would end up being the number 1 target and an offense we like with Philadelphia. However, on the flip side, Eagles passing volume wasn't really there in week 1. A.J. Brown, if he's hobbled, maybe we just see a complete rush-heavy approach. And the Chiefs are a difficult matchup on the outside for Smitty. So I think wide receiver 26 ends up equating to whereabout I feel comfortable ranking him. But I don't really have a gauge on how this is going to play out because I just don't know how healthy A.J. Brown actually is. At wide receiver 27, I got Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. And no Christian Gonzalez is the only reason why Tyreek Hill is even this high. With Tyreek Hill right now, I mean, the vibes are off. He's calling out reporters for asking why the big plays haven't come. And the Miami Dolphins look like a complete train wreck. They just lost 33-8 to what I consider a middling Indianapolis Colts team. Tyreek Hill himself, he looks checked out. There's really no other way to put it other than the fact that until the vibes get better, I cannot rank Tyreek Hill higher than a volatile wide receiver 3. The Patriots, they should be exploitable through the air. Jacoby Myers obviously just had that big game against them, but if Hill doesn't produce yet again, and if the Dolphins' offense continues to look abysmal, we are smashing the panic button on Tyreek moving forward. I just don't know what to do with him right now. My wide receiver 28 coming into the week was Deebo Samuel. Obviously played on Thursday night. I kind of, mentioned it when I talked about Terry McLaurin, but they were 25 and 28 coming into the week for me. And now Deebo Samuel has a second consecutive week outscoring Terry McLaurin. In the meantime, I think you might have to consider him this team's wide receiver 1. Again, we'll see what ends up happening week 3 on. Terry could absolutely make that statement look foolish, but so far through 2 weeks, Deebo Samuel has been evidently better. Wide receiver 29, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. He only had a 14% target share in week 1. But like I said with Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Packers boxed up the Lions in that game. And going up against Chicago, I see, a lot more time in the pocket for Jared Goff, more, designed, long developing plays to try and get J-Mo in behind. With Jameson Williams, he's a boomer bust wide receiver, but the boom weeks are absolutely week winning, and the Lions have a huge get-right spot going up against this Bears defense. Moving on to wide receiver 30, we have DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he was solid against the New York Jets last week, but not every week we're going to see a 34-32 Steelers game environment, and this game against the Seattle Seahawks has the lowest over-under of any team this week for the second straight game. Seattle, they're one of the few teams well-equipped to handle DK Metcalf. Tariq Woolen, one of the few corners that can actually match DK Metcalf's physical traits, 6'4", 210 pounds, 4.26 level speed for Tariq Woolen. So really what it comes down to it with Metcalf, Rodgers look good. And until Rodgers doesn't keep looking good, I think I have to consider Metcalf a top 30 wide receiver. But just know, coming into the year, we viewed Rodgers as volatile. If we do see Rodgers regress, we could be dropping DK Metcalf moving forward. But until then, top 30 wide receiver comes in at 30 exactly for me. But moving on to the next tier and running through wide receivers 31 through 40, DJ Moore at wide receiver 31. Despite Rome Odunze taking over as the number one from a volume perspective, DJ Moore still led the Bears in terms of air yards, and he averaged 18.9 points per game against the Lions last year. He's a yak threat, and he's attached to a Bears offense that showed big-time flashes with Caleb Williams in week 1. On top of that, Colson Loveland, not yet a full-time player. Luther Burden only played 23% of the snaps. I think the only two pass catchers you can trust for the Bears right now are Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. A wide receiver 32, we have Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers going up against the New Orleans Saints this week. And on a positive note for Ricky Pearsall, he is the clear number one outside weapon with George Kittle on IR and Juwan Jennings coming into this game banged up. However, on the negative note, Brock Purdy also out for this game with that turf toe injury. Mac Jones, he helped Brian Thomas Jr. be a 23-point per game scorer down the stretch last year, but is still a clear downgrade from what Brock Purdy represents, and this is the second lowest over-under of the slate. And I trust Pearsall as a wide receiver 3, but the range of outcomes becomes far more volatile with Mac Jones under center. A wide receiver 33, Chris Olave, the flip side of the matchup, and they have similar projections between Pearsall and Chris Olave, except I actually have more faith with Mac Jones against the Saints defense than I do Spencer Rattler against the 49ers defense this week. However, with Chris Olave, 13 targets in week 1 despite multiple medical tent scares, and you know exactly what you're going to get. 30+% of the Saints passing attack for the good or bad of that. And with Chris Olave, it's hard to imagine, a crazy week winning level ceiling, but Olave has one of the higher floors given his involvement if he can stay healthy on the field. And going over to Tennessee, we have Calvin Ridley. He had his fair share of struggles in week 1 against Pat Surtain, and the Broncos defense simply overwhelmed the Titans. However, 32% of the team targets, and his biggest competition for targets was a rookie wide receiver in Elikayo Manor. And this Rams defense could also pose issues. They limited the Texans, 9 points, 188 passing yards in week 1, but the game script could also conversely be in their favor. With Calvin Ridley, Titans are probably going to be down in this game, and 8+ targets feels like a lock for him for the second week in a row. We just need him to get more than 27 receiving yards on them. And the next tier, 35, Jerry Jeudy of the Browns, pass funnel Ravens defense, and he cooked them in both games last year. We got 45 Flacco pass attempts in week 1, and this game script also favors Jerry Jeudy, especially if the Ravens go up big. Like I said, 11.5 point favorites in this game. 36, we got Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders. 10 targets, 17.7 points in week 1. And while the Chargers limited the Chiefs wide receivers in week 1, which could spell trouble for Myers, we also have the added knowledge that Brock Bowers, he's banged up. He might not play in this game. And if Brock Bowers is out, Jacoby Myers has a huge volume ceiling. 37, Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills obviously had that monster game against the Ravens, but Allen in that game threw the ball 46 times, nearly 400 passing yards, and an 81-point game environment. And now we get a slower paced game with potential shadow coverage from Sauce Gardner. I'm hesitant, given the lack of separation, to fully buy into what we saw from week 1 with Keon Coleman, but if he goes out there and he actually dominates against Sauce Gardner, we have to be raising our expectations for him moving forward. At 38, Marquise Brown of the Kansas City Chiefs. He was the number 1 wide receiver in expected fantasy points in week 1. There's no Xavier Worthy in this game, and Marquise Brown should be the wide receiver 1 option, yet again going up against the Eagles. However, this could be a long day from an efficiency standpoint given the Eagles matchup, and we could see targets more evenly distributed in the offense. Guys like, Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, Noah Gray, potentially getting more involvement with no Worthy in the game plan. Wide receiver 39, we got Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. He only had 5 targets and a 65% snap rate in week 1. And Miami's offense, they flat out suck. He's the third option in this offense. Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane ahead of him in the pecking order. We just simply need Tua Tagovailoa to play better before we can trust Jalen Waddle in our lineups as anything more than a deep flex. And then finally at wide receiver 40, Keenan Allen of the LA Chargers obviously led the Chargers in targets in week 1. However, I do expect Ladd McConkey to take that step as the clear alpha on this team. And while Keenan Allen, he's still a solid flex option in PPR leagues, just don't go and expect what he did in week 1 to happen again in week 2. But those were my top 40 wide receivers. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. And if you want access to my rankings for the rest of the season, go over on flockfantasy.com, use promo code FSC, and get the season pass today. If you guys get the season pass, you guys will have access on the site throughout the rest of the season, and you guys will get access to all of our rankings, weekly, rest of season, and all of the tools available on the site. Like I said, promo code FSC for 30% off. The link is in the description. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in your matchups. Let's secure the W.